everyone. My name is Molly Redfield, and I'm the Communications and Event Manager for NHBSR. So NHPR and NHBSR actually have an affinity partnership, and that's based on common audiences, people who care deeply about continued opportunities to learn and who care about our communities, our environment, and our people. So I'm happy to introduce Tim Brady, Director of Corporate Support at NHPR, to actually introduce our next speakers. You've got one of those names, sort of like ours, that you kind of stumble over. New Hampshire Public Radio. There you go. Take it away, Tim.
Yeah, thank you, Molly. We really appreciate allowing NHPR to be part of the very important session today for New Hampshire housing problem, facts, impact, and better policy. As Molly had mentioned, NHPR has been a proud affinity partner with NHBSR for the past several years, and we feel, as she had already mentioned, a great alignment to our missions and the groups that we serve. We have benefited from this wonderful organization and their networking programs and events, and I want to thank Michelle and Molly for allowing us to participate today. So thank you for that. Some interesting news, if you haven't heard, New Hampshire Public Radio is celebrating 40 years as the premier statewide news and entertainment organization for New Hampshire. Since 1981, seems to be a long time ago, New Hampshire Public Radio has shaped the media landscape in the Granite State and beyond. Our mission is expanding minds, sparkling connections, and building stronger communities. And I please join you for the next 40 on our many platforms, on air, online, and podcasts. And please be on the lookout to some wonderful programs on our Outside In programming, potentially on some environment and new initiatives for energy. So stay tuned. Lots more coming with that announcement soon. Today's session, New Hampshire's housing problem, facts, impact, and better policy, is moderated today by Alan Reitz, Director of Public and Government Affairs of Hanover Co-op Food Stores. So with that, Alan, I'll turn it over to you and hope everybody enjoys the program. And thanks again for having us here.
Thank you, Tim, and really congratulations to NHPR. I think your programming has really been a solid anchor for our state. And for those who are not aware, NHPR has an incredible reputation across the country for its quality programming. So congratulations to you and everyone involved. And thank you. Our panelists this morning, individually and collectively, are among the top leaders in New Hampshire when it comes to improving near-term and long-term solutions in our state for housing. These folks are not pundits on the subject of housing. Their sleeves are rolled up every single day on this issue. Joining us on the panel, Clay Adams. He's President and CEO of Mascoma Bank. Alyssa Margolin, Executive Director of Housing Action New Hampshire. Ryan Vizda, owner of Vizda Realty Group, and Jay Childs, owner and director of JBC Communications and the producer of Communities and Consequences. I encourage you to read more complete bios on each of these guests and all the speakers. There is a link in the chat box. So let's jump into the questions and get right to it. Jay, I'm going to start with you. You have traveled this state to produce 2 documentaries on housing and our communities. What's the greatest change you witnessed since the production of your 2010 documentary?
Well, thank you, Alan, and thank you for New Hampshire Business for Social Responsibility for having this panel today and including me. I would say what started in 2008 when we did Communities and Consequences 1, we were the 6th oldest state in the country. And since then, we have moved to 2nd oldest, right behind Maine. And back then, we were really trying to talk about the problem that I don't think a lot of people put that conversation on the table that a lot of people I don't think were aware of. And one of those real critical issues was housing that was making that a problem. In Communities and Consequences 2, we've gone out and looking for solutions, what people are doing in communities to try to make the state more livable for young people and to find more flexible, affordable housing for people of all ages. And I think the biggest difference that I've seen can be summed up by Andy Dean, who's in our film, working to provide more affordable housing in the Mount Washington Valley region, when he said, we got tired of talking about it and decided we needed to take action. Talking doesn't solve a housing crisis. Building housing solves a housing crisis.
Got it.
And I think that really distills it. People are speaking up more.
Mhm.
And when something like this hits the economy, people and the workforce shortage, that was really the impetus for spurring our sequel project. When an issue like housing hits the economy, people can't find workers, that starts the process more towards action than discussion.
And that's a perfect segue to a question I have for you, Clay. You're at the position of Mascoma Bank. I mean, it's a remarkable community bank, gives you an interesting viewpoint. Many would argue that a robust housing economy is good for businesses and communities. It's just a seller's market. How do you view the current market and its impacts?
It's certainly a robust market, but I think we would all like a more balanced market. And a couple of the key metrics in round terms, it's nice to have 6 months or so of housing inventory. We're down to less than 1 month. And so it's really incredibly constrained. In our neck of the woods here in the Upper Valley, in the Lebanon, kind of Hanover area, the regional planning commissions, it's a bi-state group of them, completed a study, and it was announced last week that between now and 2030, we're going to need 10,000 more units of housing. And this is not a populous area. This is not Southern New Hampshire. So it really is incredibly dire. And I think it affects many other parts of our economy. The unemployment rate is now below 3%. People are wanting to move to this area, start families, and keep things demographically imbalanced. And that is really hard to do if there's no place to live. Even if you want to sell your house, there's not a place to move.
Interesting.
So it's a tough situation.
Oh, yeah, and you're seeing it every day. And another perspective on this is that of Ryan Vista. You're a realtor. You've been a guest on NHPR's The Exchange with Laura Kanoy, talking about a feeding frenzy. Describe a couple examples, Ryan, of the feeding frenzy you swim in every day.
First off, it's a really uncomfortable market to be an agent, especially as a buyer's agent, because as a buyer, you're giving up agency on almost all parts of the contract. So one story that just happened this weekend that I think is a great demonstration of the feeding frenzy. We listed a property in Pembroke for under $300,000. Keep in mind that the median sales price from Q1 last year to Q1 this year has jumped by 19%. So we went from a $299,000 median sales price to $356,000. So that, I'm just setting the tone here. There were 50 parties lined up before the first open house even started. 150 parties came in and the seller received 16 offers. That to me is a feeding frenzy. Like, it's just a lot of people trying to get into one house, and there's just a handful of houses on the market in Pembroke. So the offers that are actually winning in these scenarios are the ones that are either cash, no inspections. If it's not cash, it's financed with significant down payments. And then also buyers are writing into the contract that they'll make up the gap in appraisal. So if the home appraises less than the contracted sales price, they'll bring the cash so that the contracted sales price is honored.
Wow.
So that's an example of the feeding frenzy.
I see it. And like you say, I would imagine quite exhausting. Alyssa, I receive information every day on the housing issues across the country. Malibu, Montana, Hawaii, name it. It's a crisis in many parts of the country. Your work at Housing Action NH, is the Granite States problem uncommon or maybe even unique? What's your view?
Thanks, Alan, for the question. I just want to start first, though, by thanking New Hampshire Businesses for Social Responsibility for embracing this issue, because as we all want to come out of this pandemic with a strong economy, it's really important to realize that this housing issue really is a vulnerability for all of us, for our economy, for our workforce, for our quality of life. As you note, Alan, across the country, we have seen this severe supply side shortage. In the housing arena, we refer to the 5 Ls: labor, lots, laws, lending, and lumber. One could say that in northern New England, we also have the energy issue, right? Because it's expensive to keep ourselves warm. But we have a lot of incredibly high expenses as related to building materials right now. I think if you talk to a lot of members of Housing Action New Hampshire, they'll tell you that building costs in some cases have gone up 50% in some cases. And we also need to work on the public part of the public-private partnership. We know that those who provide the financing for affordable housing development are there and they're ready, and Clay is a great example of that. But we need those public dollars to leverage additional private investment. And that's why a state housing trust fund is so important. And I know I'll get a chance to talk about that a little bit later.
Great, thank you. Again, I'm just so pleased with the perspective each one of you brings to this conversation, and as well, the succinct responses that you're sharing, because my job is to land this baby on time as the moderator, and we've got a hard stop at 12:15. So these answers are to the point and awesome. Ryan, two-part question for you. First part, it circles back to this idea of housing inventory. What does it mean, and why is it a healthy market, one with inventory of 5 to 7 months?
So to calculate housing inventory, you take the total houses on the market that are on the market now in your area. So you can do that on a town by town basis, divided by the total homes sold that month. So that tells you how many months it would take for every house on the market to sell if no new inventory was added. So that's what we're saying when we say housing inventory and absorption rates. A balanced market is 6 months of inventory, and that just means that it's a level playing field for both buyers and sellers, and they both benefit in that market. That type of market is really just a mythical market. I don't know how many times we've seen a truly balanced market, but the market we're in currently is like sellers are winning and buyers are losing hardcore.
Okay. Second part of that question, creative solutions. Sometimes a sensible development, as we view it, or turning commercial space into housing, comes up against zoning and codes. But isn't that what regulations are for, to protect things that a community wants?
I'm going to challenge us here. And I think creative solutions are going to come from when we change the questions we're asking about housing, planning, zoning. As the more I learn about equity, the more I ask is who's being protected by these zones and codes? And how did these zones and codes come to in existence? If we look at Manchester, it's very clear that redlining occurred on a very wide scale, and the problems of today are from problems of the past. So I truly think that if we want to change the way that we're looking at how to develop and solve this problem, we have to look at zoning and code and planning boards and say, who are you protecting? Why was this code written, and what class is benefiting and what classes are being oppressed?
Interesting. Thank you for that clarity. Jay, looking more into our current situation, you've seen a lot of backstories, been to a lot of meetings. Are there examples where you feel that, zoning might comply with state laws, or discussions of how to comply may or may not be helping to address some issues? Any example you can offer in general?
Well, I think I really connect with Ryan's approach about who's being protected here. And in the film, we profile a community that seemed to be wanting to move in the right direction for more flexible, affordable housing by rescinding age-restricted housing going forward. But it turned out that was more an effort to just stop development, and we've all heard it, preserve rural character. So I think there's good faith concerns when I've seen things at board levels, planning board levels, select board levels, where there are valid concerns that will be expressed, such as water resources, things like that, for having more affordable, flexible housing stock. What you see sometimes, though, is, there was a discussion in one community about how do we word an ordinance so that we have the letter of the law for providing what the state says, the realistic opportunity for workforce housing in a community, at the same time making sure that those projects never happen. So there are good faith concerns going on, but there's still a lot of bad faith, what I call bad faith concerns going on. And like I said, 13 years ago, there was a lot, it was all about kind of giving people the information to be able to change a lot of minds. I think that's still valuable, but in some cases, those in communities who are really not interested in addressing the problem need to be replaced, need to be challenged, and need to have people step up and replace them. And that's beginning to happen in some communities.
Okay. A quick follow-up. What role does the jargon of, policy and zoning play in someone's decision to vote no at the ballot box?
Yeah, that can be a real issue. I've seen at some, charrettes are a great place for people to go and learn kind of how the process works and everything. But it is still, in all of the subjects that I've kind of looked at and created films for, it's one of the most jargony things in planning that I've ever seen. And it wholeheartedly takes a lot of time for people to understand these. And when you're on a planning board, you're probably not doing this full time, and you're probably not getting paid for it. And it becomes very difficult in many ways for people to understand the jargon being thrown back and forth. And if they see that on a ballot, or they see that in a meeting and they don't know what it is, they'll just vote no. Yeah.
Well, Alyssa, that sounds like your daily work. Jay's given us that peek at local policies. Like it or not, some things are controlled at the local level, but also state legislation is an issue with this. Is there something that's passed in recent years that is having a positive impact?
We have, in fact, made a lot of progress at the statewide policy level. In New Hampshire, we created a dedicated funding source for our State Housing Trust Fund, so that public-private partnership we were talking about earlier. We just stood up a housing appeals board, the first example of this in the nation, and I understand other states are taking a look at it to provide a quicker review of municipal decisions so that those with housing issues don't have to invest high dollars, legal expenses, and put in lots of years before decisions are made about proposals. We passed an accessory dwelling unit law that says that you have the right to build an accessory dwelling unit on your single family home by right or by special exception. We have passed a workforce housing law that says that municipalities can't zone out affordable housing just because they want to if there is a market there. So there has been some progress.
Good. Well, great. And I tip my hat to you. You're in those trenches. So thank you for that important progress. We'll circle back on one of those points soon. Clay, as Alyssa set up, she says, many years. Well, let's look out 10 to 40 years and the trajectory of housing in our state. What current policies and hurdles need addressing right now to help?
I think our speakers have really hit on a few of them that are important, and that's some of the zoning changes. What might have made sense 20, 30 years ago just doesn't make sense anymore. 1 acre subdivisions, other different types of age restrictions that people have spoken about. I think some of the conservation strategies that we employ with very great intention sometimes eliminate the opportunity for housing in places where it might make sense. I think a big one to me is looking at infrastructure. You can't have affordable housing without water and sewer. And there are a lot of communities that the initial investments in these things were made 50 years ago. My hope would be with the Biden administration's infrastructure bill, there could be opportunity to extend or improve some of these systems so that we can get more density in places where it makes sense and therefore put more units on the books.
Okay. I mentioned at the outset that all of you have your sleeves rolled up, and Clay, one example of that for you is the Corporate Council in the Upper Valley. Can you just describe that and what it's up to these days?
It's a group of the larger employers, a couple dozen of us in the Upper Valley, notably Dartmouth College, Dartmouth Hitchcock, the largest employer in the state. And we've been meeting for probably over 12 years now. And a few years ago, we kind of decided that we were all having great struggles finding housing for our employees. And we passed the hat. We've funded a position that is being sponsored by Vital Communities, another local nonprofit. And many of our members that are by and large the top leaders of these organizations will go to planning commission meetings and will speak out on the need to have zoning that accommodates the need for affordable workforce housing. We speak with legislators on both sides of the river, since it's kind of a bi-state area. And I think we've had some great success with that. And at the very least, we've kept the conversation going and kept it top of mind,
Right.
and so that we're one party of this.
Yeah, it's an impressive council. Our cooperative is certainly involved in having sort of a catbird seat on some of those meetings as an observer. It's important work, and I really am astounded by it. Ryan, we talk about sellers markets. Clay addressed some of that before, you have as well. What concerns do you have, say, long-term, 10 to 20, 30, 40 years out?
I have many. So first off, I see that our essential workers, veterans, first-time home buyers, first-generational homeowners are all being pushed out of the market, and incoming is Boston Metro City remote workers that have, I mean, if we look at the profile of these people, have probably benefited from multi-generational home ownership and equity from the way the law has gone to favor one party of people in our country. So I see that can be having a problem in the future, because who's going to show up to fight the housing that we need? It's going to be these people coming from the city to get this rural character. And I see that having a long-term effect. I also see that young people, first-time home buyers, are buying properties that are 100, 200 years old, and they're inheriting inventory from the past that is toxic. And not only did they buy that house without an inspection, they bought it over leveraged with student loans and now over leveraged in a property. So
Okay.
I think those are some of the concerns that I have.
Well, yeah, and I'm sure we could do a full session on those. They're significant. I've heard it said many times, oldest housing stock in the nation, New England. And I think we're doing pretty well on time. I've got 5 of noon, so about another 7 to 10 minutes, save some time for Q&A. And just want to touch on one point in the chat box. I'll be linking a link to climate's impact on migration, and the Northeast is likely to see a lot of climate-forced migration. Jay, looking back to everything you collected for communities and consequences, what's an outcome or risk faced by the communities that make up New Hampshire?
I mean, the biggest one that I'm seeing right now is even just coming out of the pandemic, with businesses trying to open again and trying to welcome people back, is I'm seeing all over my social media feeds, we need workers, we need workers. New Hampshire, as I said before, is behind Maine. Only Maine is the oldest state and the most rapidly aging state. And just from the 2021 census, New Hampshire is one of only 3 states that since 2019 and 2020 has had more deaths than births. So we need an infusion of the people that Ryan's talking about coming to New Hampshire. By the way, it's Maine, West Virginia, and New Hampshire. Okay. So we need these people. I saw going around the state, some of the most rural communities now, they're the ones that are now seeing that, wow, so many people have left. We need anybody to come and live in our communities for the continuation of our community.
Yeah, and maybe that's where the issue of rural broadband comes in, but that's again another topic for another day.
Exactly.
Alyssa, HB 586, it did not make it through the legislative session. Some contend that it threatens local control. As a proponent, please briefly describe its intent, maybe why it's failed, and what's next.
Thanks, Ellen. So we call that the Community Toolbox Bill. And House Bill 586 was a comprehensive package that would have provided economic development tools at the municipal level to help incentivize affordable housing development. So those of you in development who are familiar with tax increment financing districts and the benefits of 79E zones, that would have been made available to workforce housing. It proposed improving the predictability of process, so having some reasonable transparency with working with local review process, and also some reasonable timelines on what it takes to move a proposal, because as Clay knows, time is money, and these deals are quilted together with a variety of funding sources, and so timing is really important. And finally, this community toolbox bill would have launched a statewide championship program to really recognize the Yes in My Backyard communities who are getting it right, and to create that kind of positive incentive. Why did it fail? Because at that time at 9 a.m. that morning, we did not have a majority of House reps present in the session to get it passed. I think if you polled the House of Representatives, the 400 members, the votes were there, but for a lot of complications due to the pandemic, at an effective opposition campaign to convince legislators that it was going to take away local control, it lost. We should not be discouraged, however, because there's just so much momentum around this issue right now. We have very powerful allies, including yours. And so we'll be back and we'll get this done.
Very good. And I do see we're getting some questions into the chat and Q&A. We are looking at that, and we'll hustle along so we can save time to try to get to all of them. Alyssa, one is addressed to you, so maybe take a peek at that and we'll keep clicking along. Clay, leadership, listening skills, you practice it every single day. What are you hearing from your employees about the challenges of this housing market? And the rental market as well, I should add.
Yeah, and the rental market in our region is less than 1%, and it's really tough. And it's not just our employees, but we have a lot of customers that are small businesses or businesses of all sizes, and we hear the same thing: is our employees can't find housing, and also a consequence is people have to commute much greater distances to find a job. And that has climate implications. It has implications on people being able to be involved in their communities. And I think it's just something that I remember having a conversation with someone who had recently relocated here from Los Angeles. And he said, I never thought I'd be moving to rural New Hampshire and be paying more in rent here than I did in a major metropolitan area. And I don't think that's terribly unusual. And there's the same frenzy going on the rental market as like Ryan described in the purchase market.
And that dovetails with a comment that's in the chat talking about pay and the ability for the workforce to keep up, because the cost of living in a rural New Hampshire market is not going to command the same prices as, say, LA. Ryan, quick follow-up onto Clay's comments there. Just give us a few quick stats. You gave us one on the increase in housing prices. What are you seeing as a percentage increase in rent and property prices as you do your work?
The last 5 years, the median gross rent has increased 22% for 2 bedrooms. And what we're also seeing, so that the metric of affordability for renters has increased to 47%, and a healthy housing budget is under 30%. So renters are just spending almost 50% of their income on housing. So that puts them at a vulnerable place. And I think this is, I'm just going to go on a quick sidebar. People always blame people that are homeless that they made poor choices, but people that are renting are over leveraged in their housing expense. So they lose their job, they're 1 month away from being homeless. They didn't make poor choices to get there. It's the market is pushing them into that place.
Thank you. That's important clarity for a conversation like this. And that's why it's really valuable. We got another set of quick questions. If we can keep our answers brief and save some time for a few questions. I've got a couple minutes past noon. Clay, tell us how the voice of business can make a difference.
I think I mentioned before that some of our members have gone to planning commission meetings or city council meetings, and one notable one where a number of us attended a meeting. There was a vote on zoning something from industrial that would allow more dense housing, and we were the business leaders in the area were the ones who spoke up, and I was told later, swung the votes. And so that's a very specific example, but I think it's not typically the CEOs of area businesses that are showing up at meetings like that. And I think it had a real impact. And I think it kind of was a good example for us. It doesn't need to be a corporate council. It can be members of the Rotary Club. It can be other people of all different types of business sizes. And so I think it's really all politics and all governance is local in New Hampshire. So we can all make a difference.
That's huge. And Alyssa, you've echoed that in conversations with me before when testifying before the House or Senate. The business voice, we're all busy. It makes a big impact. Jay, how can the actions of business make a difference?
I think the actions of everyone can make a difference. I mean, I would say for people, if you have a Clay Adams in your community, if you have a Ryan Vizda and Alyssa Margolin, if you have a select board member like Stephen Porter, if you have people in a workforce housing coalition like Victoria Laracy and Andy Dean was, they went ahead and wrote their own ordinance to open up workforce housing in the Mount Washington Valley, and then took it to a planning board, did a lot of the heavy lifting, and then found a board much more willing to work with them. If you have these people in your community, one, you need to show up. One project that I covered was a very interesting innovative use project, and when it brought up rental housing, there were boos. And that project ended up going nowhere. There were 12 people who spoke against it. Nobody spoke for it. And a majority of the people in that community probably want it. So if you have somebody like these people in your community, just go to them and ask them and say, what can I do to help? Even if you can't volunteer, just reach out to a Ryan, a Clay, and Alyssa, a select board member, a planning member, and just say, you're trying to move the ball forward. What can I do to make it happen?
Perfect. And many solutions are out there. I saw one in the chat regarding the manufactured housing, resident-owned communities. It's a remarkable story that got its roots in New Hampshire. These are manufactured home parks. Jump into Alyssa. What do we need to remember about maintaining the character of New Hampshire?
Well, as you've all noted in these stories about reactions to proposals at the local level, many people are motivated by fear. They tend to show up at hearings when they're opposed to something. Think about your own life. Are you showing up when developments are proposed if you're for it? You're more likely to get abutters or others in the community who have concerns and who are fear-based. And one of the big fears is, will we lose this rural character of this community that we love? The good news is there have been proof of concept, right? You can actually build density village centers. You can actually bring affordable workforce housing to your community and preserve your rural character. It's quite possible. And so there are some great examples of it around the state. And one good example is in Conway, where or even in the Upper Valley, right? They're just really design has come a long way, and these are not the high rises of Chicago that people think of back in the 1960s. These are beautiful quality places that are really providing a really important home solution for home for your neighbors.
That's perfect, because that actually provides the answer to my final question. So I'll consider that your answer. And to the other panelists, if you can keep your answer to 10 to 15 words, what is an example that gives you hope? Like what Alyssa detailed with some of the proof of concepts. Jay, I'll go with you first.
Okay, 15 words, don't count those. I think from my tour around New Hampshire, the people that are getting involved, people who are stepping up, really people who are stepping up and running for office with the idea that I don't necessarily just want to be presenting to people anymore. I want to be a person in that seat to help make decisions to provide for more flexible, affordable housing for all ages.
Okay, that is inspiring. Clay?
I'd say so. I run a business and I talk to a lot of other business leaders. I think seeing the business community kind of really step up and play a very active role, both from an advocacy perspective, but also very creatively, in some cases, putting capital together to help solve this problem of affordability.
And your bank is really done remarkable work in that area. Ryan, something that gives you hope for our
This
state.
housing community, everybody on the panel, as soon as you raise your hand and say, I'm interested in this topic, you're pulled into this community of passionate people that just offer you support and education and conversation and just want to lift you up to help you help the community that you live in.
Very good. And we're going to jump to a couple of questions here. And Seth, I may tap you for some assistance on that. I did see one question that said, can you share local development examples, equitable transportation, et cetera? We might not have time for that, but in the chat is something called Keys to the Valley. It is a toolbox that's been put together by some of the regional planning commissions up here. We look forward to sharing it. Again, I want you to also consider signing on to the Sensible Housing Solution principles that are listed in the chat box as well. Here's a question from Emily in the chat. How valid are attempts to limit growth to only where existing water, sewer, and electric infrastructure exists? How costly and difficulty is it to add new water and electrical infrastructure? Clay, I'm going to toss that to you.
So I think it's easier to add to existing than it is to build new infrastructure. And I think there are ways to extend things existing. There are systems with capacity. There are in this region in the Connecticut River Valley, there are only a handful of towns that have it, but you can hook in adjoining towns and extend those systems. And that's one way of doing it.
Very good. Another question from Jason regarding, so, you know, he asks, I live in Amherst where NIMBYs now control everything. I'm reading Jason's comments here. I don't believe they are a majority, but they show up to vote. Educating planning board doesn't help because voters have thrown out planning board members who want housing. So what's the solution in a municipality like mine? I'm going to toss this at Jay for the quick example of maybe what you think you might recommend. Numbers
Showing up. Alyssa's point is so real that you need to understand that if you're for something in your community that's going to revitalize your community, don't assume that because it's a great idea, it's going to happen. You need to gather a group of people there and make the case so that the board members feel they're covered in voting for something or approving something.
Interesting. And I'm just going to circle back on one piece there regarding local housing development, equitable, accessible to transportation, jobs, and services, along with the alignment with the environment. These are issues. Having been on these corporate council calls, transportation is critical. Infrastructure is important. Creative solutions such as those described by Alyssa and Ryan are very, very top of mind. Seth, I'm going to have you maybe share any questions that I might have missed. I have a couple others that can wrap up our final minute or two. So while you do that, Seth, and let me know if there's anything else. I want to remind folks that in the chat box, there are the Keys to the Valley. Give it a look. Take a deep dive. I work on a new NHBSR subcommittee on housing and transportation that's combined together. So to our questioner who asked about transportation, we're looking for somebody who can help us on the transportation part of that work. Sign on to the housing principles. That is critical. We've got a nice group of names, but the more we get, the more impact we can have, just like we did on the 544 letter that was signed.
Alan, there's one question
about
how property tax plays a role in this issue.
Can you read the question?
I'm curious about how New Hampshire's heavy reliance on property taxes plays a role in this issue. Could diversifying our funding streams help?
I'll show of hands. Who wants to tackle it?
I'm happy to just comment and remind folks that affordable housing properties pay property taxes, so they feed into the system. And so sometimes folks view these developments as somehow exempt, but that is a myth. And so they definitely provide additional revenue to municipalities.
And I'd like to give you one other add-on for that, Alyssa. The Affordable Housing Trust Fund, I believe our state funds it to about $5 million a year. But it's a loan fund, really. And so what is that leveraged for construction over the past? And that's based and includes maybe sales tax on the sale of realty. Quick snippet description, please.
So the Affordable Housing Fund provides below market rate loans and grants to facilitate leveraging other federal and private resources to help with the supply side, with the production and development. We are a state that has significantly underfunded that public side for many years. So all of the other New England states do more than New Hampshire does. So New Hampshire, while we did 10 million, Vermont in that biennium did about 47 million. And you think about the population. So we're way behind there. So this is a budget year in the state legislature. So for those of you who want to lend your voice to advocacy, given the Senate Finance had its hearing on the state budget last night, now is a great time to reach out to your senator and to say, what are you doing about New Hampshire's Affordable Housing Fund? Because it would be really great to see additional voices there. Thanks.
Perfect. And that's a segue to what I'm going to make as the final question. And I'm going to give it to Clay. Given everything you know about playing an active role in public, if you were starting your advocacy work fresh from square one, what's the first thing you would do on this matter?
Show up. You can't sit on the sideline. If you show up at a meeting and you talk about it with friends, then that's how the ball gets rolling.
Thank you all. The housing principles, contact me. My name's in the chat. I tip my hat to Michelle and Molly of NHBSR. Seth, your work, really, this is good stuff, but education without action is merely entertainment. Take what you've learned here today and please go out and apply it. Thanks so much.